3 weeks after my sister's funeral, I found a small wooden box wedged behind the mirrored panel of her antique vanity, the kind with a worn brass clasp and a faint scent of lavender that had clung to the cedar for decades. Inside, under a layer of dried petals, lay a folded note in her handwriting with 4 words. "Don't trust him. Save yourself." That tiny box and that shattering sentence would launch a forensic trail so complete that within 18 months my brother-in-law would be sitting in a state prison cell. His new wife would be on probation with a permanent fraud conviction on her record. Every dollar they had siphoned from my sister's legacy would be clawed back, and I would be baking pumpkin pie for my niece and nephew in the little cottage I bought with the settlement money, their laughter drifting through the screen door from the yard that used to belong to him. My name is Elaine. At 49, I was freshly laid off from my job as a bookkeeper for a mid-sized plumbing supply company, a position I had held for 14 years, and I could spot a decimal point error in a 70-page invoice from across a conference table. Before I switched to accounting, I spent my early 20s apprenticing with a locksmith named Sal in a dusty shop off Route 9, learning to feel the click of a 5-pin tumbler through a piece of spring steel, learning that a lock is just a puzzle that someone else has already solved, and that odd pairing of numbers and deadbolts would become the only reason I didn't finish out my 40s on a park bench. My sister Laura was 51 when she died, and she had been the quiet architect of her household for as long as I could remember. She had a system for everything: color-coded folders for the mortgage, the kids' education savings, the retirement plan her husband Mark always forgot he had. She worked as a clinical operations manager at a regional hospital network, a job that came with a group life insurance policy worth $200,000, and she had structured her beneficiary designations with a meticulousness that would have impressed a trust attorney. I still remember the Sunday evening ritual she kept. After dinner, she would open a green ledger book, the one with the cloth spine, and spend exactly 45 minutes reconciling every household account, while Mark watched television in the next room and the kids did homework at the kitchen table. She was the kind of woman who filed her paid bills by date and cross-referenced them against a spreadsheet she updated by hand, because she said no computer program could match the attention she paid to her family's future. I did not know until later that this same ledger book would become the skeleton key that unlocked Mark's entire fraudulent architecture. Mark himself was a genial man with a firm handshake and a history of commercial real estate deals that started with grand promises and ended with break-even at best. He had a talent for looking busy while Laura carried the financial weight of the family. For 12 years I watched that dynamic, the way she quietly corrected his oversights, the way he smiled through every crisis as if someone else would handle it. Then Laura was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer at 46, and the world narrowed to hospital corridors and chemotherapy schedules. I moved into their spare bedroom the night she told me, packing a single suitcase and my tool bag into the back of my 10-year-old Corolla, and I never left. Lily was 14 then, all gangly arms and 2 serious eyes, and Sam was 11, a boy who processed grief by asking endless questions about how chemotherapy actually worked. Over the next 2 years, I poured $60,000 of my own savings into that household with the precision of a double-entry ledger. $12,000 went to a new roof after a hailstorm punched through the old shingles and Mark's insurance claim got tangled in paperwork he couldn't untangle. Another $20,000 covered mortgage payments during the 8 months Mark was between opportunities, a phrase he used at dinner parties while Laura napped off another round of treatment. And $28,000 I set aside in 2 529 college savings plans, one for each child, because Laura had started them, and I couldn't bear the thought of her watching from a hospice bed while those accounts went unfed. I didn't think twice. They were my blood, and I was the kind of aunt who shows up with a tool belt, a checkbook, and a decent torque wrench. The funeral was held on a grey Tuesday in October, the kind of day where the leaves fall in wet clumps and the air smells like damp wool. I stood in the receiving line in a dark dress I had borrowed from a neighbour and watched Mark work the room with that easy charm, shaking hands with cousins I barely recognised, accepting condolences as if he were a widower in a television drama. Beside him was a woman I had seen only once before, at Laura's memorial service planning meeting. Her name was Angela, and she had been a colleague from his commercial real estate office, a leasing coordinator with a sharp bob and a wardrobe of tailored blazers in shades of charcoal. I had not realized their relationship had accelerated from supportive co-worker to full-throated romance until I saw her hand resting in the small of Mark's back at the cemetery, her nails painted a lacquered red that seemed to belong to a different occasion entirely. After the burial, the house filled with people carrying casserole dishes and murmured condolences. I drifted through the rooms, accepting hugs from my sister's co-workers, the neighbors who had brought meals during chemo, my own former colleagues who had known Laura through the stories I told at lunch breaks. Lily and Sam sat on the back porch with a few friends, their faces pale and exhausted, and I made a mental note to check on them in an hour, to bring them hot chocolate and not just more platitudes. In the kitchen, the caterers had set up a folding table with a ham and a basket of rolls, and a 3-tiered tray of cookies that no one was eating. I was refilling the coffee urn when I heard Angela's voice for the first time, slicing through the low murmur of grief with a tone that was all business. She walked through the front door carrying a leather portfolio and a clipboard, and within 10 minutes she was cataloguing the living room with the brisk efficiency of an estate liquidator. I saw her run a finger along the edge of my sister's mahogany sideboard, flip over a crystal vase to check for a maker's mark, and make a notation on her list. She examined the silver tea set that had belonged to our grandmother and asked Mark, loud enough for me to hear across the room, whether it was solid sterling or just plate, because the insurance valuation matters. I felt the first cold prickle of something wrong, a sensation that settled into the base of my skull and would not leave. Later that evening, after the last guest had gone and the disposable plates had been bagged, I found myself standing alone in Laura's bedroom. The door had been kept closed since her death 7 weeks earlier, and when I pushed it open the room still held the faint ghost of her perfume, a light floral scent she had worn since college. The curtains were drawn, the bed still made with the quilt she had stitched during her first pregnancy, and her antique vanity sat against the far wall, a piece she had inherited from our grandmother. It had a large oval mirror set in a carved oak frame, and as I sat on the padded stool I noticed the mirror was slightly loose, one corner lifting away from the frame by a 1/4 inch. I pressed my fingers along the edge, and the whole mirrored panel shifted, revealing a shallow compartment behind it. The space was dark and narrow, but my fingertips brushed against something solid and I worked it free. A small cedar box, maybe 6 inches long and 4 inches deep, its brass clasp tarnished but intact. The lid fit tightly, and when I pried it open the smell of dried lavender rose up, powdery and sweet. Nestled under the petals lay a pressed 4-leaf clover, brittle with age, the same one Laura and I had found in our grandmother's garden when I was 8 and she was 10. I remembered that afternoon with sudden, aching clarity. The two of us crouched in the clover patch behind the rhubarb, Laura's brown hair falling over her face, and the way she had pressed the clover into my palm and said, "This means we'll always be lucky, as long as we stick together." We had passed that same clover back and forth for decades, a silly token of a promise we both believed, and beneath it tucked flat was a single sheet of yellowed notepaper, folded twice. I unfolded it with trembling hands. The handwriting was unmistakable, Laura's careful cursive, the letters slanted and precise. "Don't trust him. Save yourself." I read those 4 words 15 times, the meaning sinking past my grief into something harder and colder, a stone settling in my stomach. My sister, in her final months with tubes in her arms and a body that was betraying her, had found the strength to hide this warning from me. She had known something, and she had tried to reach me from beyond her death. I thought about the last time I had seen her conscious 2 weeks before the end, when she had gripped my hand and said, "Elaine, promise me you'll read the will. The whole thing, don't let them rush you." I had assumed she meant the funeral arrangements, the normal end-of-life bureaucracy. Now I understood she had been trying to arm me. I folded the note along its original creases, tucked it into the inner pocket of my cardigan, and walked back into the silent house as if nothing had changed. I had no evidence yet, no leverage, no plan, but my sister had left me a weapon, and I intended to use it. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family isn't defined by blood, but by who shows up when it counts. The very next morning, I was still sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold in my hands when Mark and Angela cornered me with a thick leather portfolio and an air of rehearsed concern. Before I could even manage a sip, they spread documents across the oak tabletop and began their presentation. Mark's eyes were puffy but his hands were steady. Angela sat directly across from me, her posture straight, and launched into a speech she had clearly practiced. "Elaine, we've spent the last few days going through Laura's financial records," she began, tapping a manicured finger on a stack of stapled pages. "The situation is more complex than we realized. The mortgage is 2 months behind, there are credit card balances that accrued during the illness, and the children's expenses are mounting. We need to consolidate and protect their inheritance before the whole estate unravels." She slid a document toward me. It was a durable power of attorney, granting Mark full legal authority over all of Laura's remaining assets, including the house, her retirement accounts, and the children's trust. The language was dense and legalistic, but I had spent 20 years parsing contracts, and I could see the trap immediately. Once signed, Mark could liquidate everything without my oversight. And this, Angela continued, sliding a second document across, is a residential lease. It's just a formality to make your living arrangement official while we sort out the estate. It protects your rights as a resident. I picked up the lease and read the terms. It listed me as a month-to-month tenant with a rent amount of $2,600, nearly triple what I had been contributing to household expenses. The document included a clause allowing termination with 30 days' notice, without cause, and it gave the landlord, meaning Mark, the right to enter my room for inspections at any reasonable hour. My name was typed already in a cursive font at the signature block, waiting for my pen. I felt the folded note in my pocket, a warm pressure against my ribs. I let my face go slack, deliberately unfocused, the expression of a woman overwhelmed by grief and paperwork. "I'm not sure I understand all this," I said, my voice wavering just enough. "My head's been so foggy since Laura passed. I don't want to sign anything I might regret. Can I take a few days to think it over?" Angela's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We really need to move quickly," she said, her tone still pleasant but edged with impatience. "The mortgage company won't wait, and the kids' dental bills are piling up. Every day we delay, the household loses ground." I let my shoulders slump further. "Just a week," I said. "Please, I promise I'll look at everything carefully. I just need my head to clear." Mark nodded, a flicker of old guilt crossing his face. Angela shot him a look that could have etched glass, but she gathered up the documents and snapped the portfolio shut. Before they left the kitchen, she told me I might want to start packing some of my non-essential items to make space for the new home office we're planning. That same afternoon, I discovered exactly what make space meant. I walked to my guest room, the one where I had slept for 2 years, and found the door open and half the furniture moved out. Angela had packed my clothes into 2 cardboard boxes and stacked them against the hallway wall. My bedside lamp was gone, my books were in a plastic bin, and the bed had been stripped down to the bare mattress. In its place, Angela was directing Mark to move a heavy oak desk toward the corner, while she told him to be careful not to scratch the floor. She saw me standing in the doorway and offered a thin smile. "Oh, Elaine, we're just reconfiguring the space. You'll be much more comfortable in the sewing room. It's cozier and it's farther from the kids' wing, so you'll have some privacy." The sewing room was an 8 by 10-foot space at the end of the upstairs hallway, with a single small window, a closet that housed the water heater, and no heat vent. It contained a narrow twin bed, a 3-drawer pressboard dresser, and a floor lamp with a flickering bulb. In less than a day, I had been physically relocated to the smallest, least livable room in the house, a clear message that I was now a tolerated inconvenience, not family. I looked at the pile of boxes, felt that hot stone in my stomach, and said, "Thank you, that's very thoughtful. I'll start moving my things right away." I saw Mark's shoulders relax a fraction. They believed I was broken. That evening, I found Lily sitting on the edge of her bed, staring at a photo of her mother. She looked up at me with those 2 serious eyes and asked, "Why is Dad's friend rearranging everything? She moved all your stuff. Did you make them mad?" I sat beside her and wrapped an arm around her thin shoulders, choosing my words carefully. "Grown-ups sometimes get confused when they are sad," I said. "I'm just giving them some space to sort things out. Don't worry about me, sweetheart. I'm not going anywhere." I couldn't tell her the truth, not yet, but I promised myself that I would protect her and Sam from whatever was coming, even if it meant pretending to be a pushover for a while. Over the next several days, the pressure intensified. Angela brought a notary public to the house, a young woman with a mobile stamp kit who set up at the dining room table. I walked through the kitchen, saw the notary's ledger open, and felt my pulse spike. I leaned against the counter, let my knees buckle slightly, and began breathing in short, shallow gasps. The notary looked up, alarmed. Angela rushed over, her expression flipping from frustration to performance concern in a heartbeat. "Oh, Elaine, honey, are you all right?" I clutched the counter and said I was having a panic episode, that the stress was too much and I just needed to lie down. The notary packed up her kit and left, and Angela stood in the hallway with her arms crossed and a muscle twitching in her temple. She knew she could not force a signature from a woman who appeared to be falling apart, and she was furious. The next morning, she stopped bringing me coffee. She started leaving stacks of laundry on my bed with sticky notes that read, "Fold before noon," or "Dry cleaning run, thanks." I played the part of a foggy, compliant relative who didn't have the energy to protest. I shuffled to the kitchen every morning in an old bathrobe, offered to make coffee, and asked vague questions about what I should do with myself. Angela began treating me like household staff, and I did it all with a placid smile, because while they thought I was fading, I was watching. I noticed the new SUV first, a navy blue Denali with heated leather seats and a panoramic sunroof, the kind of vehicle that runs $75,000 before taxes. Mark drove it into the driveway 3 days after the notary visit, and Angela posted a photo of the interior on social media with a caption about new beginnings. A week later, she booked a 10-day resort vacation in the Cayman Islands and talked loudly to a travel agent on speakerphone about how they had finally saved enough to splurge. The same day, Mark took a call from a credit card company, and I overheard him say, "The payment's coming, I promise. We've got a large settlement about to clear." None of this squared with a family supposedly drowning in debt and scrambling for mortgage money. One evening, while I was folding towels in the laundry room, I heard Mark and Angela arguing in the kitchen. Their voices were low but not low enough. "The second mortgage is 2 payments past due," Angela hissed. "If you don't get that insurance check deposited soon, we're going to lose the house before we even own it free and clear." Mark muttered something about needing the sister's signature to release the trust, and Angela replied, "Then we'll forge it. We already did it once. I have the light box, it's not hard." I pressed my ear to the door, my heart hammering. Forge what? The insurance endorsement? A mortgage? The pieces began to click into place. They were juggling multiple frauds, and I was the inconvenient witness they needed to evict or neutralize. I began to suspect the life insurance check. Laura's policy through the hospital network was for $200,000, with the children named as beneficiaries. As their guardian, Mark was supposed to deposit those funds into a trust for their education and living expenses, a trust that Laura had discussed with me years earlier during a quiet conversation over coffee. If he had intercepted and diverted it, I needed proof. The following Tuesday morning, Mark and Angela attended a marriage preparation seminar at their church, a 2-hour program that would keep them occupied until noon. I waited 10 minutes after their car pulled out of the driveway, then walked to the closed door of Mark's home office. The door had a standard Schlage entry knob, a 5-pin cylinder with no security pins, the kind I had been picking since I was 22. I slid the tension wrench I had made from a salvaged windshield wiper insert into the bottom of the keyway, applied a light clockwise pressure, and worked a hook pick over the pins one by one. The first pin set with a soft click, a tiny vibration transmitting through the pick to my fingertips, then the second, then the third. I could feel the slight rotation of the plug as each pin stack aligned at the shear line. The fourth pin was sticky, probably a bit of corrosion, but a little more torque and a gentle rake with the hook, and it snapped into place. The fifth pin was the last, and a moment later the lock clicked open in under 20 seconds. I stepped inside. The office smelled of paper and stale coffee. A metal filing cabinet sat against the far wall, a 4-drawer unit with a single locking bar across the top. The lock was a wafer mechanism, even simpler than the door, and I had it open in less than 30 seconds with a jiggler rake. Inside the second drawer, behind a folder labeled Tax Returns 2019, I found a manila envelope marked Laura/Life Ins. In Angela's handwriting, the top document was a photocopy of the insurance company's check, dated 3 weeks after Laura's death, in the amount of $200,000, made out to Mark T. Henderson as guardian for minor children Sam Henderson and Lily Henderson. Below it was a deposit slip for an account at a small regional credit union, where Mark and Angela had opened a joint account 2 days before the check was cut. The endorsement signature on the back of the check was a clumsy imitation of Laura's flowing script, her distinctive capital L with its bold looping entry stroke, her rounded cursive A that always connected to the next letter with a little tail. This forgery's L was stilted, the loop tracing an uneven oval, and the overall flow was robotic, the pen having stopped and started at multiple points. I slipped a jeweler's loop from my wallet, a 10-power triplet I had carried since my locksmith days for reading key binding codes, and held it over the signature. Under magnification I could see hesitation marks, minute tremors where the forger had slowed to match a template, and a faint graphite smudge along one edge indicating the signature had been traced from a lightbox. I photographed everything with my phone, front and back, every deposit slip, every page, using the macro setting to capture the fine detail. Then I carefully returned the folder to its exact position. Beneath it I found a second file, unlabeled, containing a draft copy of the lease Angela had presented to me. But this version had an addendum I hadn't seen before, a clause stating that failure to pay rent within 5 days of the due date would result in immediate eviction, and a separate document titled Voluntary Waiver of Residency Rights, with a signature block that already had my name printed in a cursive font identical to the forged lease. I continued searching, my hands moving with the economy of motion I had learned as a locksmith, never displacing anything more than necessary. In the back of the bottom drawer I found a slim cardboard envelope containing a portable LED light box, the kind artists use for tracing, with a power cord and a set of translucent paper clips. I lifted it out carefully, noting the thickness of the tracing surface and the faint graphite dust collected in the corners. Beneath the light box were several practice sheets of tracing paper, and on them, in varying degrees of quality, were attempts to replicate my signature. Someone had printed a sample of my name from the lease draft, placed it under the tracing paper on the light box, and practiced tracing the letters over and over. The earliest attempts were wobbly and uneven, the later ones were convincing enough that a bank teller might not look twice. Alongside my signature were similar practice sheets for Laura's signature, tracing her endorsement lines from old checks and documents. A third envelope in that drawer contained what I later understood to be the smoking gun of the second mortgage fraud. It was a copy of a home equity loan agreement for $85,000, signed with what purported to be Laura's signature and dated 4 months before she died, when she was in hospice, heavily sedated, barely able to hold a pen. The notary stamp on the document looked legitimate at first glance, but I recognized the notary's name. It was the same mobile notary Angela had brought to the house the week before. Either the notary was complicit or Angela had forged the notary seal as well. I photographed those documents too, my hands shaking slightly with the adrenaline. Before I left the office, I made one final sweep. I pulled each drawer fully from the filing cabinet and checked the undersides. Taped to the bottom of the bottom drawer, hidden behind the metal glide, I found a small USB flash drive wrapped in electrical tape. I pocketed it, replaced the drawer, and locked the cabinet. Then I wiped down every surface I had touched with a microfiber cloth I had brought for that purpose, and I slipped out of the office, locking the door behind me. The whole operation had taken 43 minutes. Back in my cramped sewing room bedroom, I plugged the USB into a burner laptop I had bought for cash at a pawn shop. The drive contained a complete backup of Mark's personal email account, exported as a PSD file, dating back 16 months. I spent the next 5 hours reading messages that made my stomach turn. 6 months before Laura's death, while she was still in hospice with a morphine drip and a bedside whiteboard tracking her pain levels, Mark had been emailing Angela about the life insurance policy. Laura's hospital policy pays $200K to the kids, but as guardian I can manage it. Once it clears, we can pay off the second mortgage and still have enough for a fresh start. Angela had replied, "We just need to get the sister out of the picture. She's too nosy. Once she's gone, we consolidate everything under your name. Is there a way to redirect the check without the trust noticing?" A week later, another message from Angela included a PDF attachment titled Forged Endorsement Sample, a mock-up of Laura's signature with notes on pen angle and tracing technique. Mark's reply, "I don't feel good about this, but we're running out of options. The second mortgage is overdue and the bank is calling." I searched the archive for second mortgage and found a chain from 3 months before Laura's death discussing a 15% interest home equity loan Mark had taken out against the house, using Laura's signature that had been forged while she was sedated in a hospital bed. The loan documents were signed and notarized, the notary stamp clearly falsified because no notary would have witnessed a dying woman sign with a trembling, morphine-addled hand. The loan amount was $85,000, and the proceeds had been used to pay off Mark's personal credit card debt and fund a down payment on the Denali. I also found emails discussing the fabrication of the lease, the plan to evict me as soon as the insurance money cleared, and a thread where Angela suggested they could claim I had abandoned the children to strengthen a custody petition and remove any legal standing I might have. I saved every email, every attachment, to an encrypted cloud folder I had set up after a quick tutorial from a tech-savvy friend. Then I sat in the dark, the glow of the laptop screen the only light, and realized I had enough evidence to put them both in prison. The next morning I drove 12 miles to the county probate court, a squat limestone building with fluorescent lighting and the particular silence of official record rooms. I filled out a request form and waited 40 minutes before a clerk handed me a certified copy of Laura's last will and testament, a 16-page document she had executed with a probate attorney 18 months before her death. I hadn't read the full will at the time. I had been too busy coordinating her care. Now I sat on a hard plastic chair in the courthouse hallway and read every line. On page 11, I found the passage that would save us. Laura had created a testamentary trust for the benefit of the children, to be funded by all assets passing through her estate, including any life insurance proceeds. The trust named 2 co-trustees, Mark and me, acting jointly with mutual veto power. The critical language stated that any distribution of trust funds required both signatures, and that if either co-trustee became incapacitated, died, or was removed, the assets would not pass to the remaining trustee alone. Instead, a corporate fiduciary would be appointed by the court, and no disbursements could occur without a judicial order. In other words, Laura had built a dead man's switch. If I was removed from the picture, Mark couldn't touch a cent without jumping through legal hoops that would take months and attract scrutiny. And because the insurance proceeds were payable to the children, not to Mark individually, they should have been deposited directly into the trust. The fact that Mark had funneled them into a private account constituted conversion of trust property. Laura had amended her will 6 months before she died, after her diagnosis, after she'd had time to watch Mark's behavior with clear eyes. She had seen the vultures circling, and she had locked the gate. I took the will to Rachel Okonkwo, a probate litigator in her late 40s whose name I got from a legal aid referral service. Her office was a converted Victorian near the courthouse, the walls lined with Bar Association awards and framed certificates, and she listened to my summary for exactly 12 minutes, asking no questions, before she picked up her phone and dialed the fraud division of the insurance company. By the end of that call, we had a stop payment alert on the joint account Mark and Angela had opened, and the insurer agreed to open a formal investigation into the forged endorsement. Rachel leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. Under Ohio law, she said, a constructive trust is an equitable remedy imposed by a court when someone wrongfully holds property that rightfully belongs to another. When Mark deposited those insurance proceeds into his personal account, he became a constructive trustee for the children. Every dollar he spent on that SUV, that vacation, those credit card bills, he spent as a fiduciary. And fiduciaries who breach their duties can be compelled to repay every cent from their own pockets with statutory interest. If we can prove forgery and fraud, we can seek treble damages under the state civil theft statute, though most cases settle for full restitution plus penalties. She paused and leaned forward. I can file a petition to impose a constructive trust, a motion for a temporary restraining order freezing all remaining assets, and a lis pendens against the house, which will cloud the title and prevent any sale or refinancing until this case resolves. But I need you still inside that house, gathering final proof while I work the legal machinery. Can you do that without tipping them off? I told her I could. Good, she said. We need the original forged lease with the false signature block, if you can retrieve it without detection. And we need any evidence linking the forgery directly to Angela or Mark, handwriting exemplars, tools, anything. As I was leaving, she added, there's one more person who should be involved. Joanne Liu, the compliance officer at the bank that issued the second mortgage. The loan documents with the forged notary seal, that's federal bank fraud. Joanne's been investigating a cluster of suspicious notarizations from a mobile notary in this area. I think your sister's loan is part of that cluster. She may want to speak with you directly. A few days later, I met Joanne Liu in a coffee shop on the other side of town, a quiet place with sticky vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked since 1998. She was a small woman in a navy suit with a calm, methodical way of speaking that reminded me of the best auditors I'd worked with. She told me that the notary whose stamp appeared on the second mortgage had been reported for suspicious activity by several lenders. At least 6 loans bore her stamp, all of them involving forged signatures of incapacitated individuals. The FBI was already building a case. Joanne asked me if I could get the original loan documents from Mark's office without being detected. I told her I had already photographed them. She nodded and said, if you can get the physical originals, that would be ideal for handwriting analysis and latent fingerprint testing. But if you can't, the photos may be enough to support a subpoena. One more thing, is there any chance you could leave a small recording device in the home office, a digital voice recorder, just to capture any conversations where they discuss the fraud? It's risky, but if you can do it safely, it would give us contemporaneous admissions. I told her I would think about it. In truth, I already had an idea. My friend Susan, a former cardiac nurse, had an old Olympus digital recorder she had used for dictating patient notes before retirement. It was tiny, had a 30-hour battery life, and could be set to voice activation mode. I could stash it in the office vent, and if Mark and Angela talked about their schemes, it would catch everything. That same night I called a family meeting in the living room and told Mark and Angela that I had been thinking about their proposal and that maybe they were right. I should start transitioning out and finding my own place. But I needed a few more weeks to get my finances in order, to look at apartments, to make sure my retirement account was accessible. I asked if I could stay just a little longer, maybe earn my keep by helping around the house. I even offered to tackle some of the home maintenance projects Mark had been ignoring for years. Angela's expression softened by half a degree. She thought she was winning, that the slow, compliant aunt was finally breaking down. Mark nodded and said he appreciated my willingness to be reasonable. They relaxed visibly, and over the next week Angela started leaving documents out on the kitchen counter again, less guarded as if I were too dulled by grief to notice. I used that openness to my advantage. Early one morning, while Angela was at the gym and Mark was walking the dog, I fetched Susan's recorder and a tube of medical adhesive tape. I went to the upstairs hallway where the HVAC return vent was located, a large grill held by 2 screws. I unscrewed the grill, pulled out the old filter and peered into the darkness of the duct. The office was just below and I could hear the faint hum of Mark's desk heater. I positioned the recorder deep inside the duct, pointing downward, secured it with 2 strips of tape, and switched it on in voice activation mode. Then I replaced the filter and the grill, tightened the screws and dusted the area with my sleeve. No one would notice unless they pulled the filter and stuck their head into the duct, and no one had done that since the house was built. The pipe burst on a Saturday morning around 9 o'clock, while we were all in the kitchen. Mark was attempting to make pancakes and had managed to coat the counter in flour. Angela was scrolling through her phone, complaining about a credit card that had been declined at a department store the night before. I was washing dishes in the sink when I heard a sharp crack behind the refrigerator, followed by the sound of water gushing under pressure. A rusty galvanized pipe elbow, hidden in the wall cavity behind the appliance, had finally given way after 50 years of slow corrosion. Water shot out in a cold jet, pooling across the Italian tile Angela had insisted on installing the month after Laura's death. Mark grabbed a dish towel and held it uselessly under the spray while Angela shrieked about the new hardwood in the adjacent dining room. I shut off the main water valve in the basement, a brass gate valve that hadn't been turned in a decade, using a pipe wrench I kept in my tool bag. Then I came back upstairs, assessed the rupture, and told Mark to pull the refrigerator out so I could access the wall. He stared at me blankly. "Don't we need a plumber? It's Saturday. Nobody's going to come until Monday." I was already rolling up my sleeves. "I can fix it now," I said. "Just help me move the fridge." The summer I was 23 between locksmith apprenticeships, I had worked 6 months on a maintenance crew for a sprawling apartment complex where I learned to sweat copper, replace shut-off valves, and repair the endless parade of leaks that plague old buildings. I hadn't touched a pipe cutter in years, but muscle memory doesn't fade. I grabbed a mini tubing cutter from my toolbox and cut out the damaged section of half-inch copper, the little wheel scoring the metal with a clean, steady rotation that sang through my fingers. I deburred the edges, slid a shark bite push to connect coupling with an inline shut-off valve onto each end, and pushed hard until I felt the satisfying click of the teeth biting into the pipe. The fitting locked watertight without a single drop of solder. Within 40 minutes the repair was complete. I even cut a square of drywall from a scrap piece in the garage, screwed it over the hole, and feathered joint compound in smooth, even strokes, promising to sand and paint later. Mark stood in the doorway the whole time, holding a damp towel, his expression a mixture of awe and embarrassment. "I didn't know you could do all that," he said. Angela emerged from the dining room where she had been frantically mopping water off her hardwood. She looked at the repaired pipe, the clean patch and the dry floor, and for just a moment her corporate mask slipped. "That's actually impressive," she said, and there was a flash of something human in her eyes, the briefest acknowledgement that I had value beyond nuisance. I seized that opening. "I don't mind helping around here while I'm still staying," I said, drying my hands on a rag. "Matter of fact, I've been meaning to repaint that office of yours, the one with the peeling crown molding. I could sand and redo it this week, no charge. Consider it me earning my rent while I house hunt." After a long pause, Angela nodded. "Fine, but keep it neat. I don't want paint on the carpet." That afternoon Mark handed me the key to the office door, a brass key on a ring with a plastic tag reading, "Study." I now had legitimate access to the room where all the incriminating evidence lived. Over the next 3 days I moved painting supplies into the office, drop cloths and brushes and a gallon of eggshell white, and I worked in 2-hour increments always when Mark and Angela were out running errands or attending meetings. While the paint dried between coats, I systematically searched the room again, this time with the freedom to take my time. I already knew what was in the filing cabinet, but I wanted to check for anything I had missed the first time. In the back of the closet, behind a stack of old property brochures, I found a locked briefcase with a 3-digit combination lock. I released the shackle by feel, applying tension and turning the dials until I felt the slight give of each gate aligning. The case opened with a soft click. Inside were Angela's personal records, her resume, her social security card, and a sheaf of court documents from another state. I read them with growing horror. 12 years earlier, Angela had been convicted of felony forgery in Indiana for embezzling from a previous employer, a real estate title company where she had forged loan payoff letters and diverted over $90,000 into a dummy account. She had served 18 months in a women's correctional facility and was still on probation when she met Mark. The conviction had been sealed in that state, but she had kept the records in a misguided attempt to own her past, as she had written in a journal I also found in the briefcase. The journal contained pages of rationalizations. Some people are born to take what they need. The system is rigged against people like me anyway. I've earned a second chance, and I'll do whatever it takes to keep it. I photographed every page, returned the briefcase to its hiding place and locked it again. Then I retrieved the original lease draft with the false signature block from the filing cabinet and carefully swapped it with a high-quality color photocopy I had made at an office supply store. The original went into a manila envelope, which I slid into the inner pocket of a coat I had already moved to my car. That night I retrieved the voice recorder from the vent. I listened to it in the bathroom with the door locked, the shower running to mask any sound. The device had captured hours of conversations, most of it mundane household noise, but then I heard the segment that froze my blood. Angela's voice, sharp and frustrated. If Elaine dies before she signs, we can just forge her signature and claim she agreed to everything. Dead people don't contest leases. Mark's reply was a mumble, something about not wanting to think that way, and Angela snapped, "I'm not saying we do anything. I'm saying if she has a health scare, we don't call 911 right away. We wait, we protect ourselves. The documents come first." Another recording caught Mark on the phone with the credit union, his voice rising in panic as the banker told him the insurance funds were frozen due to a fraud alert. "What do you mean, a fraud alert? I'm the guardian, I have every right to that money." Angela could be heard in the background shouting, "Hang up and call our lawyer. Don't say another word." They were starting to realize the walls were closing in, and they were getting desperate. The maximum cruelty beat came a few days later. I had already phoned Susan and told her exactly what I planned. She was horrified but agreed to be waiting around the corner in her car with a blood pressure cuff and a bottle of smelling salts. I chose a moment when Mark and Angela were in the living room, arguing about a credit card that had been declined at a restaurant earlier that evening. Their voices were sharp and stressed, the kind of fight that happens when money is running out and blame is ricocheting. I walked into the room, clutching my chest with my left hand, my face contorted, and let my knees buckle. I hit the hardwood floor hard, jarring my shoulder and hip, and I made strangled, gasping noises. My eyes were closed to slits, but I could see the scene in the dim lamplight. Mark was standing near the couch, his mouth open. Angela was across the room, beside the coffee table where a stack of documents lay spread, the life insurance file and her portfolio and several bank statements. Angela looked at me. Her first movement was not toward my collapsed body but toward the coffee table. She stepped directly over my shaking hand, her heel clipping my knuckle, and grabbed the stack of papers, clutching them to her chest. She said, her voice calm and practical, "Mark, call an ambulance. I have to secure these documents. If something happens to her in this house, they'll search everything." Mark knelt beside me, his face pale. He pressed 2 fingers to my wrist, checking my pulse, but he didn't tilt my head back to open my airway, didn't check for breathing, didn't do any of the basic first aid steps Laura had insisted he learn after her diagnosis. He kept glancing over his shoulder at Angela, who was now sliding papers into a leather satchel with methodical urgency. I heard the soft zip of the bag closing. I counted the seconds. 37 seconds passed before Mark pulled out his phone and dialed 911. During that time, not a single person checked if I was still breathing. Not a single hand tried to help. Angela walked to the kitchen and returned holding a manila envelope, the one I had swapped hours earlier, and she placed it in the satchel. Only then did she look at me again. I heard her say, from what felt like a great distance, "Don't touch her. If she's injured, we could be liable. She's probably faking anyway." The casual cruelty of that line extinguished the last flicker of family loyalty I had ever felt for my brother-in-law. The woman who had raised his children, who had paid his mortgage and mended his roof, had lain on his floor, and he and his fiancée had stepped around her to protect their fraud. The paramedics arrived 6 minutes later. By then I had positioned myself on my side, breathing in shallow gasps, and Susan had appeared at the door claiming to be a concerned neighbor. She took over the scene with professional competence, telling the EMTs she knew my medical history and would monitor me overnight. I revived just enough to refuse transport, insisting I just needed rest. The paramedics took my vitals, found them normal, and left after making me sign a refusal form. When the house was quiet again, Susan helped me to my room. She checked my blood pressure, which was slightly elevated but stable, and then she handed me the small voice recorder she had activated from her pocket when she arrived. She had recorded the entire scene starting from the moment she walked in. I listened to the playback with headphones, my gasp, the thud of my body hitting the floor, Angela's voice. "I have to secure these documents." The sound of her heels on hardwood, a faint click as she stepped over my hand. I heard her unzip the satchel, the rustle of papers. In the background, Mark's breathing, rapid and shallow, and his distant voice. "She's not moving, Angie. Should we turn her over?" Angela's reply, frosty. "Don't touch her. If she's injured, we could be liable. Wait for the paramedics. She's probably faking anyway." I had them. I had the audio of a moment that proved, beyond any reasonable doubt, that they valued their forged documents over my life. The confrontation came 6 days later. Rachel had filed the motion for a temporary restraining order and the lis pendens, and the court had granted both within 48 hours, freezing all of Mark and Angela's accounts, including the credit union joint account, where the insurance money had been deposited. The insurance company had completed its internal review, found the endorsement to be a clear forgery, and reversed the deposit, reclaiming the full $200,000. The bank, alerted to the second mortgage fraud, had frozen Mark's home equity line and flagged his social security number in the federal fraud database. Joanne Liu had filed a suspicious activity report with FinCEN, and a postal inspector had opened a parallel investigation into the forged notary stamps, which crossed state lines. Mark and Angela woke up on a Tuesday morning to a series of bounced transaction alerts, a notice from the bank that their accounts were under investigation, and a call from Mark's real estate brokerage informing him his license was suspended pending the outcome of a criminal inquiry. Their world was collapsing, and they knew at last that I was the cause. They cornered me in the kitchen at 7 that morning before I'd had coffee. Angela's face was a white mask of fury, her careful professional composure completely gone, replaced by raw, spitting rage. She slapped a stack of papers on the counter and pointed a trembling finger at my face. "You did this," she spat. "You've been sneaking around, stealing documents, feeding information to some lawyer. Everything is frozen. The kids' college fund, the mortgage payment, our personal accounts. You're going to fix it. You're going to come with us to the bank this morning. You're going to sign whatever they need to release the freeze, and you're going to tell them this was all a misunderstanding. You owe us that, after everything we've done for you." Mark stood behind her, clutching a coffee mug that rattled against the saucer. His face was a mess of confusion and resentment. "Elaine," he said, his voice cracking, "we're family. I loved Laura. I would never hurt her children. You're tearing this family apart because you're bitter and alone. If you don't cooperate, we'll have you evicted today. We have the lease. We have the power of attorney. You'll be out on the street by sundown." I looked at him, and for one strange second I saw Laura's face in the curve of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled when he was trying to be persuasive. My sister had loved this man once, had built a life with him, had borne his children, and he had spent her final months forging her signature on predatory loans and planning to evict her sister. The grief welled up, but I didn't let it show. I said very quietly, "You'll have to drag my corpse to sign that, and even then my dead hand won't hold a pen." Angela grabbed my arm, her fingers digging into my bicep hard enough to leave bruises that would purple the next day. "You ungrateful," she began, but the front door opened. Rachel Okonkwo walked into the kitchen holding a leather attaché case, her expression calm and unhurried. Behind her came Detective Singh from the County Financial Crimes Unit, a starky woman in a grey pantsuit with a badge clipped to her belt, and 2 uniformed officers. They had a warrant for Mark's arrest on charges of forgery, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Detective Singh read them their rights in a flat, even voice while Angela's grip on my arm slackened, and then released. Angela began shouting about false accusations and wrongful arrest, but one of the officers produced handcuffs and snapped them onto Mark's wrists. Angela was detained as an accomplice and led away in a separate car. I stood in the kitchen and watched them go, the coffee pot still gurgling on the counter, the morning sun slanting through the window over the sink where Laura used to grow basil in a clay pot. The kids were at school during the arrest, thank God. I picked them up that afternoon, brought them to Susan's house and sat them down in her living room. I told them that their father and Angela had made some very serious mistakes with money, that the police were investigating, and that for a while they would stay with me. Lily cried. Sam asked 100 questions, his 11-year-old brain trying to process a reality that made no sense. I answered as truthfully as I could without burdening them with details they weren't ready to carry. I promised them they were safe, that their mother's plans for their future were still intact, and that I would fight to keep it that way. Over the following weeks I petitioned for emergency guardianship. The court granted it after reviewing the evidence of Mark's criminal activity and Angela's prior conviction. The kids moved into my small bedroom in the house, and I slept on a pull-out couch in the living room until we could find stable ground. The next 3 months were a whirlwind of depositions, forensic audits and court hearings that played out in wood-paneled chambers and fluorescent-lit conference rooms. Rachel Okonkwo built a case so airtight that the district attorney's office adopted her civil filings wholesale as the blueprint for the criminal prosecution. Here is the procedural scaffolding that dismantled Mark's life. First, the constructive trust motion. Rachel argued that when Mark received the insurance proceeds as guardian for the children, he held those funds as a fiduciary. Under the restatement of trusts, any property acquired by a trustee through breach of duty is held in constructive trust for the beneficiary. We petitioned the probate court to declare Mark a constructive trustee and to compel him to disgorge every dollar he had diverted from his personal assets. The judge agreed, issuing an order that froze Mark's personal savings, his retirement account, his brokerage holdings, and his equity in the house. Second, the civil theft claim. Ohio Revised Code Section 2307. 61 allows treble damages for civil theft, meaning a plaintiff can recover 3 times the amount stolen, plus attorney's fees, if the defendant acted with intent. We had evidence of intent from the email chain, the lightbox, the practice sheets, and the voice recordings. Treble damages on $200,000 would have been $600,000, a sum that would have bankrupted Mark 3 times over. The threat of that judgment, combined with the criminal charges, put enormous settlement pressure on him. Third, the forensic accountant we hired, a woman named Carla Reyes who had spent 15 years tracking embezzlement for the SEC, tore through Mark and Angela's financial records with a fine-toothed comb. She found that the second mortgage loan proceeds had been deposited into a shell business account Mark had opened under a defunct LLC, then funneled into personal credit card payments, a timeshare in Florida, and the down payment on the Denali. She traced the insurance money from the credit union account to Angela's personal checking, to a luxury travel agency for the Cayman vacation, to a high-end furniture store for a leather sectional they had bought days after Laura's funeral. She prepared a 70-page report with flowcharts and bank statement annotations that would have been exhibit in any trial. Fourth, the lis pendens on the house. By filing a notice of pending litigation against the property, we clouded the title, preventing any sale, refinance, or transfer. The house was already underwater due to the fraudulent second mortgage, but now it was completely illiquid. Mark couldn't access his remaining equity, and the bank, facing a fraud investigation, began its own foreclosure proceedings on the fraudulent loan. Joanne Liu worked with Rachel to unwind the second mortgage, treating it as voidable due to forgery. That opened a federal inquiry into bank fraud, which brought postal inspectors and FBI agents into the picture. Facing the possibility of 15 years in state prison and additional federal charges, Mark and Angela collapsed. Their defense attorney, a harried public defender, negotiated a plea deal. Mark pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree forgery, 1 count of grand larceny, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud against a financial institution. He was sentenced to 4 years in a state correctional facility, with eligibility for parole in 2, and ordered to pay full restitution. Angela pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and was given 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent bar from working in any fiduciary capacity. The restitution order included the full $200,000 in insurance proceeds, the $60,000 I had contributed to the household, plus 9% prejudgment interest running from the date of conversion, plus legal fees and statutory penalties. The total came to $310,462. The court established a judicial trust for the benefit of Lily and Sam, with me as sole trustee. The recovered insurance money, now fully restored, was deposited directly into that trust, plus the college savings I had already invested, locked in 529 plans with me as the custodian. No one could touch those funds without my signature, and the trust terms mirrored Laura's original design. If I became unable to serve, a corporate fiduciary would take over with court oversight. The kids were safe. But the house, the beautiful 3-bedroom colonial with the wraparound porch where Laura had planted her rose bushes, was in a precarious limbo. The fraudulent second mortgage had been voided, but the original first mortgage was still outstanding, and the property was underwater by nearly $40,000. The lease pendants prevented a sale, but Mark, now incarcerated and stripped of his assets, had no means to make payments. The bank initiated foreclosure on the first mortgage, but Rachel negotiated a short sale to a cash buyer, me. I used a portion of the restitution award, the $60,000 principal plus interest that I had contributed to the household, as the down payment. The court approved the sale at a price that cleared the first mortgage and stripped all liens. I held title for exactly 4 months, just long enough to repair the water damage from the pipe burst, paint the walls a soft grey that Laura would have loved, and plant new lilac bushes along the fence line. Then I listed the house with a real estate agent. It sold in 3 weeks to a young couple with a toddler, a family that would fill those rooms with new laughter. The net proceeds, after commissions and closing costs, netted me $240,000. With that money, I purchased a small cottage on a half-acre lot directly adjacent to the old house, separated by a hedge of overgrown lilacs. I discovered it purely by chance, while walking the property line one afternoon. The cottage had been owned by an elderly widow who had passed away 2 years earlier, and it had sat empty, waiting for the right buyer. It was a 2-bedroom with a screened porch and a brick fireplace, built in the 1940s, with hardwood floors that creaked in the same tonal register as my childhood home. The kitchen had original tile countertops and a pantry with a window that faced east, catching the morning light. I paid cash, $185,000, and used the remainder to fund Lily's and Sam's college plans fully, and to establish a small maintenance fund for the cottage's inevitable repairs. The day I signed the final title transfer for the old house, I walked through its empty rooms one last time. The vanity mirror in Laura's bedroom had been repaired and left in place for the new owners. The cedar box and its note were long since removed, and now sat on my new dresser under a pane of glass. I stood in the doorway of what had been my sewing room exile and let myself remember everything. The way Lily used to curl up on my bed with a math textbook and ask me to explain compound interest. The way Sam would hand me a lark he had found at a garage sale and ask me to teach him to pick it. The way Laura's voice sounded on the phone when she would call me from her hospital bed to ask if I had remembered to pay the water bill. Then I walked out, locked the door, and handed the keys to the real estate agent. Moving day was the first Saturday in April. Lily and Sam helped me carry boxes from the garage to the cottage, and by late afternoon we had the furniture arranged, the beds made with fresh sheets, and a pot of chili simmering on the stove. We planted Laura's favourite roses, a David Austin variety called Gertrude Jekyll, along the front walk, using the same trowel she had bought from a garden catalogue years ago. As I tamped the soil around the roots, Lily looked at me and said, "Mom would have loved this place." I nodded, unable to speak past the knot in my throat. The children are teenagers now, Lily 17 and learning to drive, Sam 14 and tall enough to look me in the eye. They spend every holiday, every school break, every long weekend at the cottage. I taught Lily to balance a checkbook and to read a credit card statement for hidden fees, and I taught Sam the basics of residential wiring and how to rekey a door lock, skills they will carry into adulthood like talismans against the kind of predation their father attempted. We plant tomatoes in raised beds where the lilacs end, and in the evenings we sit on the porch and watch the fireflies blink across the darkening yard, the same yard that used to belong to him. The framed note from my sister hangs on my bedroom wall, the 4 words faded but still legible. Below it I keep the pressed 4-leaf clover, sealed in a little plastic sleeve. Sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I think about her hand writing those words, probably in the small hours of the morning while the house was quiet, and the morphine let her find a window of clarity. She had spent her life managing chaos, and even at the end she managed to protect what mattered most. I like to imagine she knows, somehow, that I listened. Mark was released on parole after 22 months, and now lives in a rented basement apartment on the other side of the county, working a minimum wage job at a warehouse. His marriage to Angela dissolved within 6 months of the conviction, the stress of probation and public disgrace grinding their relationship into ash. Angela moved out of state after a series of debt collection lawsuits and a wage garnishment order that will follow her for years. I don't keep tabs on them, but the kids see their father occasionally during supervised visits, and I have never spoken an unkind word about him in their presence. They will make their own conclusions, and soon they will be old enough to read the court records and understand the full shape of what happened. For now, I just make sure they know they are loved, that they were fought for, and that their mother, even in her absence, was the one who built the fortress that saved them. The cottage is small, but it smells like baking bread on Sundays, and the windows face east, so the morning light spills across the kitchen table where we eat pancakes and complain about homework. Sometimes I still reach into my pocket and touch the edge of a tension wrench out of habit, and I remember that the quietest tools are often the ones that unlock the loudest doors. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Tell me in the comments. If this story hit close to home, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell, because I share a new story of family, betrayal, and reckoning every week. Until next time, keep your eyes open and your tool bag close.